and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the last event in our summer webinar series. Today, we're going to discuss the new salary transparency laws and what you need to know as the employer. If you've joined us in the past, you know I am Sophie Dietrich. I am the HR professional for the Compliance Center here at Wagner, Falconer, and Judd. Our team is dedicated to supporting your business as you navigate any human resource and employment law questions. And as always, we're happy to have you with us today. I'll share some quick housekeeping items before we get started. Please send any questions via the chat option at the bottom of your window. We should have time to address questions as they come in, so send them our way when you think of them. Also, so you are aware, the webinar is being recorded to share with those who cannot attend live. We will also be sharing a link to the recording afterwards for your reference too. So with those items covered, let me introduce you to our presenter, Janelle Stanton. As many of you know by now, Janelle is a senior associate here with the employment law team at WFJ. She brings over 9 years of employment law and business litigation experience to the team, and she dedicates much of her practice to teaching business leaders on all things HR and employment law. If you've gotten to work with her directly before, you know she's a great thought partner to have around, and we're excited to have her share with us today as we navigate this important topic. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and with that, I'll hand things over to Janelle.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Sophie. And like she said, please do submit any questions that you have. It's always livens things up a little bit and I think makes the conversation a little more interesting. So we've got a big topic today. We're talking about pay transparency laws. I've got a bit of an introduction and then we'll dive right in. Most of what I'm covering today is Minnesota specific. But I did include other states. Yeah, there's some maps in here so you can see where states are passing these laws other than Minnesota, because there's quite a few. Pay transparency, what is it? Well, it's a very broad term, and it just means the practice of openly sharing information about compensation, including salary ranges, bonuses, other financial incentives, both within the company and to potential candidates. We're not talking about this particular law today, but for a very long time, it was considered taboo to talk about your salary with other people, and that practice of not telling people and sharing led to or helped to lead to these pay inequities that we have in our world today. And in fact, many states have passed laws that say an employer cannot prohibit an employee from discussing wages. It's discussing their own wages, of course, sharing their own pay. There's some exceptions to that, which is beyond the scope of this presentation. But essentially, employers now cannot prohibit their employees from sharing their salary with each other. And what this leads to, and what the thought is that when people are open and sharing and are informed about what other people are making, it helps promote fairness and equity practices in compensation. There is a bona fide growing national trend toward pay transparency that's been driven by the need to address issues like pay inequality. So more and more states, including Minnesota, are enacting legislation that require employers to disclose pay ranges and prohibit asking about previous salary history. The movement is definitely part of a broader effort to tackle longstanding wage gaps, especially for women, people of color, and other historically marginalized groups. And why is this important for employers? And we'll get into this much more when we're talking about the pay reporting requirements. But pay transparency, it's a very scary thing, but I do want to challenge employers and leaders and HR to think about how pay transparency can be a benefit. It helps reduce pay disparities, of course, but it builds trust between employers and employees. Presuming you don't have any pay inequity issues, when employees know that their pay is determined fairly and consistently, it can improve job satisfaction and engagement. And also, it's just a requirement of the pay equity laws that each state does have. So looking here quickly, you can see I've got a few charts. I don't usually use these, but I thought these are very illustrative, at least for me. So you can see how the median earnings by sex and female to male earnings ratio since from 1960 to about 2022. Females have always lagged behind males in their median earnings, women earning 84% of what men earn in that age bracket. So this is a ongoing issue and something that so far has not been able to be solved yet, which again is likely the impetus and the driver for these types of changes. I put this in there as well. I thought this was really, again, very illustrative. That lighter blue column is men's pay, their median weekly earnings of full-time wage and salary workers in the U.S. This is just the second quarter of 2024, so this doesn't have any historical data in it, but this shows the differences in pay by educational attainment. So at every single level, men out-earn women, and at the bachelor's degree and the advanced degree level, the pace at which they out-earn women even grows, which is, I think, something that surprised me. I thought for sure we would see women doing better at, upon greater educational attainment. Unfortunately, just not the case. And like I said, this is still 2024, a very current issue. But it's not just pay disparities between men and women. There are also some pretty egregious pay disparities amongst different folks of different races. So that blue line that kind of goes across is all races. White non-Hispanic is that black line, so just right above the norm for all races. Asian individuals out-earn even white folks, at least according to this particular graph. But then you see Hispanic and American Indian and Black individuals falling much lower than their white and Asian counterparts. So again, obviously there are still problems and areas that we can improve upon. I don't know if anybody has had to does any interviewing, but this is a very challenging ban that has come into play. So I do interview folks for the law firm here, and the asking what salary expectations are or discussing salary in any way has really changed in the last couple of years versus what we were doing before. So what is a salary history ban? These are legislative measures that prohibit employers from asking for or using. It's not enough that you can't ask for it. You also can't use it, salary history, when you make hiring or compensation decisions. And again, the rationale here is that these salary history bans is that if you're using salary history to make compensation or hiring decisions, that perpetuates those historical pay inequities suffered by those groups, because that information follows individuals throughout your career. So if you were given an artificially low pay rate based on your gender or your race or some other protected class status, if people are setting your new salary based on that artificially low prior salary, that is going to keep those wages low. Whereas if an employer is forced to instead, before they interview, come up with what they are willing to offer for that position, then the thinking is that it's going to break that cycle and force employers to set compensation levels based on factors other than an applicant's past compensation, like based on skill, education, experience levels, that sort of thing. I said it was a trend and I meant it. So you can kind of see here, which I always think it's interesting to look at it in map format, because I always like to make fun of the Californias of the world. And I also like to make fun of New York, New Jersey. And then, I used to call Illinois the California of the Midwest, but Minnesota's really catching up to that. So you can kind of see the spread here. You've got all the states kind of out on the West Coast, with the exception of Alaska, many, many states out in the East Coast, couple states in the middle, and then we have some surprises. So Missouri, it's not a statewide salary history ban. It is Kansas City. Alabama, South Carolina, Ohio again is also Cincinnati, Columbus, and Toledo have salary history bans there. But this is kind of indicative of where things are going. And I would say that in the next couple of years, we could add 2 or 3 more to this map pretty easily. So generally, just talking generally now, we'll talk generally because I think there are so many different laws that it is worth pointing out how those laws vary from one to another. So generally, employers are prohibited from using salary history to screen applicants, set compensation levels, and make hiring decisions. So, I have had this happen to me where, I am called when I've applied for a job, and I am asked, what is your current salary, to see if it fits in line with what they are hoping to offer for that particular position. And if you set a number and you didn't say, but that's negotiable, they would say, okay, thanks, click, and then you would never hear from them again. So you can't use salary history to screen out applicants who might be outside of the band that you're willing to pay. And this is where some of the transparency pieces, while they're very much a sort of onerous, burdensome challenge for employers, in the end, once we are used to having to do these things, I actually think it could be helpful, because if you're posting your pay band, somebody who applies for your job is obviously happy with your pay band, so you don't even need to worry about it. They're going to fall somewhere within that pay band, and you'll be able to set the compensation according to their skills, their experiences, which will hopefully, again, prevent any pay equity challenges or lawsuits down the road. You can't use their salary history to set their compensation levels. That happened all the time, right? Where you would ask somebody what they earned, and maybe you had sort of a number in your head, but then when you heard that they were making less, you're like, great, we can get that person for just give them a couple $1,000 more, and I bet they come over here. And so that is no longer permissible in Minnesota. You also can't use it to make hiring decisions. So if somebody does share their salary history with you, because people can still share it on if they want to, but you can't use it to make hiring decisions, even if you know that what they're currently earning is maybe over and above what you are offering for that position. There are some additional, some laws are also placing restrictions on people prohibiting using salary history to justify pay disparities. And I just sort of have to shake my head at this a little bit, because you really shouldn't use that. When you look at those graphs show you that women and people of different races are paid historically lower amounts versus men or white individuals. So if you use that salary history to justify a pay disparity, you're probably violating that state's equal pay law in some way. So definitely, even though Minnesota may not be one that says, yeah, you can't use salary history to justify pay disparities, I still think that is a wise habit to make sure you're implementing, because even if you are in a state, even if you're not if you're one of these grayed out states, that's great for you. But if you're using salary history and you're saying, well, you were paid less before, so the reason you're making less than John here is because you had this lower salary history. So there's also some states have some restrictions that say retaliation against applicants for refusing to disclose salary history is banned, and that's in many jurisdictions where if somebody says, I'm not going to tell you what I earn, that retaliation is against those applicants is banned in a lot of these jurisdictions.
Hey, Janelle.
Yeah.
We've got one question.
Great.
Is it okay to ask for desired pay?
And we'll talk about that in a little bit here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Not in Minnesota. So salary history bans, depending on the jurisdiction, might allow an employer to rely on the applicant's voluntary disclosure of salary history information or confirm voluntarily disclosed information, but that's not all states. And I'll share something I think that's taking people a little bit by surprise in Minnesota. Some salary history bans still allow an employer to inquire about salary history if the disclosure is required by law. I'm struggling to think of when that would be, but I suppose there could be situations since, they wrote about it. And then some states still will allow an employer to inquire about or confirm an applicant's salary history once they've made an offer of employment that includes compensation levels. And in some jurisdictions, you can only do that after the applicant has accepted the offer. So there is some wiggle room in some of these statutes, but not in all of them. So the way around this, or what we had thought the way around this was exactly what Sophie just said. Can you say, well, what are your salary expectations? And I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but you guys know I like to do this. So let's talk about it now. If you say to somebody, what are your salary expectations? What are they going to tell you? 9 times out of 10, what they're going to say is, well, at my current job, I earn $65,000 a year. And you're going to say, okay, great, thanks, and move on. So when you ask that question, you're going to probably elicit that salary history information. And we'll talk about how Minnesota, what their specific take is on that. But let's see, this was, May of 2023, or maybe it was June of 2023. Essentially, SF 2909, it amended Minnesota's human rights law to prohibit employers from asking about or using an applicant's salary history. This did go into effect on January 1st, 2024. So you might be saying, Janelle, why are you talking about this now? And I think the reason I'm adding it is because we still talk to clients very regularly that don't know this is the law. So this was effective at the beginning of this year, but it does seem to be something that maybe has flown under the radar somehow. There is an exception for some collective bargaining agreements effective on the implementation date of any collective bargaining agreement after January 1st, 2024. So just something to be aware of if you have a unionized workforce. But who's covered? So the salary history ban applies to employers that have one or more employee. And some of you might be going, Janelle, I thought I heard something about 30 or more employees. And you would be so right, except wrong law. 30 or more employees is for the pay ban posting law that we're going to talk about in a little bit here. So the salary history ban applies to companies that have just one or more employees. And what is prohibited? An employer cannot ask about or consider an applicant's wage, salary, earnings, their benefits, or other compensation. So you can't ask, what is your commission structure with your previous employer, to determine, okay, that commission's not great, so this person will probably take worse than what our commission structure is and then offer commission off that. You also can't ask about benefits. So if you're asking, what are your benefits like at your current employer? And if they're just absolutely lousy benefits, you could say, wow, we're going to just give this person, these terrible, this terrible plan or something like that. You can't do that. So all of the earnings, benefits, and other types of compensation are all bundled into this. And so you cannot inquire into or even consider an applicant's salary history for determining wages, setting salary levels, or deciding on benefits or other compensation. So you have to, and what I am doing is I'm setting what I am willing to pay, or at least an amount that I'm willing to pay, when I have these conversations with people that I am interviewing. So you can't use it to determine what you're going to pay or set salary levels. Employers cannot access public records related to salary history to inform their compensation decisions either. You might be saying, who is that apply to? Well, that's government. So if you don't know already, government employees have their their salary is essentially public information, public record. So you can find out how much the coach of the University of Minnesota Gopher football team makes versus how much the coach of the University of Minnesota Gopher volleyball team makes. And so you can't do that either. So accessing those records to determine salary history, if you're going to use it to inform compensation decisions, is also banned by this law. So when the salary history ban does not apply, so it does not apply to voluntary disclosure. Employers can consider salary history if the applicant voluntarily discloses it to request a higher wage or salary. And again, if the applicant's pay history is public, employers can't use it unless they access the records for that purpose. So that's a little bit confusing. And if you are somebody who's looking at public records, you probably want to reach out to us, because remember, I said you can't use it to inform compensation decisions. It doesn't mean you can't look at it, but I still think that that is probably a very bad idea. So discussing salary expectations. Now, here's where this becomes problematic for a lot of us, because you can consider or act on voluntarily disclosed pay history information as long as the employer has not asked, encouraged, or prompted the disclosure. And again, what does somebody say when you say, well, what are your salary expectations? They're going to say, I earn X. So if you ask that question, you're going to elicit salary history information, which would technically violate the salary history ban. Now, if somebody just brings it up, that without any prompting or encouraging, and they just say, well, this is what I earn, and so I'm going to need to earn at least this much to come over here. That is okay, that voluntary disclosure. But if it comes at your prompting, then that would technically be a violation. And employers can share information about the wages, salary, and benefits that are offered for the position. And starting here soon for companies with 30 or more employees in Minnesota, you will have to provide that information. So some key oh, yes, of course.
Yes. So just by way of clarifying and understanding, we've got a comment. So then the employer can say our starting pay is $9 an hour, for example. Is that going to be within your range?
I do no, you can't. That's salary expectations. Because again, they're going to say, well, geez, I make, $13 an hour at my current job. So no, you cannot ask. You can say this job pays $9 per hour. And is that, that is what the pay is, and that is perfectly fine. But if we can't start asking these questions. And so that's why having what you're going to pay be established is so critical, because I think that the best way to comply with this law is to just tune all of that out and know what your pay is for the position. So remove that salary history inquiry from job applications, from interviews. Train your managers to make sure that they're getting at information on skills, experience, qualifications. And then document your salary decision. So you want to base the compensation on skills, experience, market factors, and document that. It does not do you any good, and I think it potentially is a violation to ask any questions about salary history. Now, you could potentially say the salary range for this job is $9 per hour to $11 per hour. Is that okay with you? And please do not share what you currently make. As long as you're being very careful about that. But I still think somebody's willing to say, that's okay. I make $13 an hour, either something like that. So I do think that trying to move away from that, and there again, if you are going to be a company that has to post that pay band, if you show on the job posting that the job pays between $9 and $11 per hour, there's no reason to ask, because then when you make that conditional offer of employment, the employee should know that they're going to fall somewhere within that $9 to $11 hour range that you provided. Now, they may still turn the job down, but presumably they're not going to apply for a job where what the salary they could earn falls outside of their desired range. So it is a retooling, a reconfiguring of how we are doing things. And like I said, because you can't ask for what their expectations are because of the information you're likely to elicit, this is the issue. And I was at first when this came out, I was like, well, you could probably still ask about the salary expectations, and you can't. So Sophie, do we have some other questions?
Thank you. We do. Yeah, do you
Okay.
want to keep going?
Sure.
Okay, so our other question is if this applies to staff who live outside of Minnesota and they work from outside of Minnesota, does the employer still have to follow these laws?
Probably not. And this is an interesting area of law, and something that is really developing in the state of Minnesota. So there's been some recent decisions by courts impacting the state of Minnesota where the courts were looking at whether Minnesota's employment protections apply to employees who are working for a Minnesota company but live and work remotely from Wisconsin, for example. And the courts have been looking at this question because we're in a very fluid sort of work environment right now, right? Where somebody might work remotely, all week, 1 week, and go in the office 1 week, 1 day the next week. And then they're in 3 days a week the next week, but they're coming into Minnesota. And Minnesota has all these employment laws that are very favorable to employees that Wisconsin does not have. When is somebody working so much in Minnesota that Minnesota's laws now apply? That's an open question. And the courts have not established any kind of bright line rule. It's all on a continuum. So somebody who, keep on with our Wisconsin, Minnesota example, somebody who lives and works in Wisconsin, but only comes to Minneapolis once every 6 months for a meeting, it'd be very difficult for them to try to argue that Minnesota's laws apply to them. They live and work in the state of Wisconsin. But if, again, we're on a sliding scale, so if you would kind of expand that continuum and say, okay, now this person, they come into the office in Minnesota quarterly. Is that enough? Probably not. This person comes in 2 days a week. Is that enough? Potentially. So that is a very gray area, and something that is going to require that you work with us, if you have our service, to try to determine which of your employees may be subject to this and help you assess that level of risk. Because if they are falling in that line where they're spending a whole lot of time in the state of Minnesota, there might be a point where you're no longer comfortable with the risk that this person isn't a Minnesota employee. But again, that sliding scale, there is no sort of one size fits all. It's got to be 25% of their time spent here, or 50% of the time. Wouldn't that be great if there was? But there isn't right now. So we'll see if that comes about.
Right. Great. Thank you. So two more right now. So one client is wondering if we can suggest any methods or resources to help them set fair salary scales.
Love that question. And I love where your head's at. So there are lots of resources out there that you can be using. So if you want to go on sort of the cheap end, something you could do is you could look at like Indeed, for example, and you could look at other companies that are similar to your company and see what they are offering for pay, assuming they have to post their pay band. um we've done that before. It kind of helps you keep your sort of your eyes on the gauge of what's happening out there, because if you're seeing, if I see another law firm that's hiring new associates at $70,000 but I'm only paying 65, well then I know I'm probably outside of that range. It is an imprecise science to use it that way though, because there are so many factors and market factors that go into establishing good pay rates. So you can do it on the cheap. You can also, they're benchmarking companies, and that's all that they do. And so that would be based on the geography, the size of your company, and more specifically geared toward your company. The data outcomes are much better when you use a benchmarking company. You pay for it. But especially if you are over 30 employees and you're facing the prospect of posting pay bands on your job posting starting soon here, I think that would be something that companies are going to want to consider, so that you know where about you fall, and then you can kind of start assessing who's within these pay bands that we were going to establish and who's falling outside.
Great, thank you. And the last one for now is we post our salary range on all job postings, but what I run into is people saying they didn't see the range. Can you tell me what it is? So, what do we say in this situation?
Yeah, so you can say the range. You can say our range is 45 to 50,000. Please don't share with me what you're currently earning, but in answering your question, this is the range. You can still have that conversation. It's just you can't try to elicit what they are currently earning. And when you ask, this is our range, are you okay with that? That is where you are opening a door for them to give you that information. So as long as you say, I'm going to provide the range, but please don't share your current salary history, the range is this, that should be fine. Now, I think if somebody does say, "Oh, that is outside of my range because I earn this," like even if you tell somebody not to tell you, they still might do it. You sort of have to just put on your horse blinders about that, and you'll have to make the decision based on, if you're going to make an offer to that person who has shared their salary. He said, just kind of try to ignore it. Make your decision based on skill, experience, qualifications, not that past compensation. And that's where did I put that? Oh, document. It's on the slide I was on. Sorry. I went fishing for something that's right here. Documenting those salary decisions. So you may want to document that the person shared their salary, but that had nothing, no bearing on the decision you're making, that you had the pay range, and based on this person's skill, experience, and the fact that we're in Minneapolis and we're not in Minot, it means that they're going to make this much money. And document that rationale, so that if somebody does come back later and say, hey, wait a minute, I think they made this decision because I said my salary at my current job is too high. You can have that documentation there to help provide that defense.
Great, thank you. And we do have one more. Do we still have time? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
let's, yep.
okay, cool. So this question, if you have a set range of pay for a position and offer a candidate a salary within that range, but then they counter with a wage that is outside of the range, are you then able to pay a candidate what they requested, even though it is outside of the posted salary range?
Yes, yes, you can always do that. You're going to run the risk of setting a precedent, and you're going to run the risk that your pay range is maybe not a good faith pay range since you're willing to go above that range potentially. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the next step. But yeah, of course, you can, if somebody has amazing prior experience and they're bringing a bunch of great clients, and you've never seen a candidate like this, so they're the unicorn that goes outside of your top end of your range, you can do that. You just have to be aware that you're setting a precedent, and then maybe you need to re-examine those salary ranges.
Great, thank you. And then somebody jumped in with a resource idea. They said,
Great.
"O-Net is a great source." So that would be www.o and then netonline.org. So
Great.
that, yeah, thank you for that.
Is that a free resource or is that a paid resource? I'd be curious. Maybe they'll let us
Oh,
know.
yeah, let's see. Oh, free, she says.
Free. Love it. That sounds like a great price.
Yeah, great. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So moving on to job posting pay disclosure requirements. So again, this is very much a feature of these pay inequities that are very stubborn and are not going away, as we saw from our earlier chart. So I'm going to talk again just generally because, again, we have a number of jurisdictions that have job posting pay disclosure requirements. So, generally, depending on the jurisdiction, these laws are going to require that an employer disclose the compensation rate or range for a position either in the job posting at some point during the pre-employment process or on an applicant's request. And again, the timing for when you have to provide that compensation range depends on the jurisdiction that we're looking at. So they're all a little bit different. Some don't have it a requirement that it be in the job posting, but they say that before you make the offer of employment or along with the offer, you have to share or at the applicant's request. Typically, these laws apply to external job postings. However, there are some situations, Colorado, where internal job transfers and promotions, the pay range has to be posted on those internal job opportunities as well. So typically, it's externally facing is what we're talking about. But for internal job transfers and promotions, in some states, you've got to post it there as well. Okay, a few less states here. Oregon's missing from here. Alabama is missing from here. South Carolina, Maine. This is a newer sort of. I think we kind of got started with the salary history. Then somebody thought let's require job posting pay disclosures, and so now a bunch of other states are like, yeah, great idea. So here's the map for which jurisdictions are requiring job posting pay disclosures. Now, again, these are either states with statewide or local laws. Again, Ohio here is highlighted not because it has a statewide law, but because there are city jurisdictions within Ohio that have these laws. So very much a trend. And again, I would say that we would expect other states to be jumping on this bandwagon as well. So Minnesota's job posting pay disclosure law is not effective until January 1st. So we have time, but we have only a little time. As my mother likes to say, we're in the Burr months. We're into September now. So our time is running out. And starting January 1st, if you have 30 or more employees at one or more sites in Minnesota, you are going to have to comply with this law. And again, the purpose being that it's pay transparency so that people know what everybody interviewing for this job is going to be offered, and it should be, at least relatively close to what people in the position are actually earning. This applies to just about every company. Like I said, if you've got 30 or more employees, it also does apply to third-party recruiters. So if you're a staffing agency and you're posting on behalf of a covered employer, you still have to comply with this law. So it's not a way to end around having to publish your pay bands to go through a staffing agency. They are required to share that as well. And you have to have what's required to be disclosed under Minnesota's law is the minimum and maximum annual salary or hourly range. So like I said, 45 to 50,000, $9 an hour to $11 an hour, whatever that range is. And it has to be based on a good faith estimate. So this is where if you are offering outside of that range quite frequently, that is probably no longer a good faith estimate of what that annual salary and hourly range is going to be. And it can't be an open-ended. So you can't say 60,000 plus, depending on qualifications. So you do have to bookend that with both a minimum and a maximum. If there isn't a salary range that you offer, then you need to post the fixed pay rate for that position. So again, it's not open-ended, but if it's $9 an hour, it's $9 an hour. So you can post that and would have to do that in that situation. Minnesota's law also does require a general description of health, retirement, and other benefits that are available. Now, I would say let's not get into this is, here's our deductible and here's the qualification, what you have to do to qualify to be on our benefits, or, we have a 401k with a 3% match. You don't have to do that. I think it's enough if you bullet point. So we have health, dental, vision, life, 401k, profit sharing, and I don't know, FSA or something like that. So I think it's enough to bullet point that. You don't want to get into any ERISA issues by, really getting explicit with your descriptions of the benefits that your company is offering. This isn't the place for that. But it's not just pay, benefits, and other compensation. Other compensation might include commission. So if it's a commission eligible position, add that to your job posting so that people understand that you don't have to put your commission structure in there, but that it is a commission position, and that, details will be provided. So you do have to provide all of this in your job postings. And again, it can be handled pretty swiftly. You don't need to go into a ton of detail there. And like I said, you've got to define that salary range, the minimum or maximum. And that good faith estimate, it's a good faith estimate at the time of the job posting. So as long as if you're going to have those situations where you're pretty sure you found the unicorn applicant, where they're right on the money. They've got all the experience. They're, like I said, bringing a book of business, or you just know they're going to be fantastic for some reason, that you might want to jump outside that. But at the time you posted it, you didn't know that person was going to come along. It's just that if you are continuing to fall outside of that pay range, that is where you might run into issues with that good faith estimate required. And those open-ended ranges, that's to ensure, or prohibiting open-ended ranges, that's to ensure clarity and transparency. And so that is not permissible, those open-ended ranges. All right, this one gives me, other employment attorneys here, some heartburn, right? Because when we start publishing what we pay, we're going to have applicants and current employees go, wait a minute, I don't make that much. So why are they offering this pay to somebody who's new, that hasn't even been with this company, through thick and thin like I have? This is going to not only potentially be a morale issue, but it could expose pay inequities that you have in your workplace. So I think it's incredibly important to, at this time, right now, start by reviewing and surveying your current pay rates, policies, and practices. So what are you paying? List out all the different job positions that you have within your company and see where people are falling within those pay rates. And that will help you determine, do we have some people who are outside of this pay rate? Because when you look at pay stubs, if you're somebody who does payroll, you're just looking at, 35 hours times this much is this much money. You're not really looking at one employee versus another. But when that data gets compiled into one Excel spreadsheet, and you start looking at things, you're like, geez, why is this person so low? It is very, I think, very illustrative to look at data in that way. You see things you wouldn't see in the ordinary course of doing your job in HR or payroll, because it's highlighted, it's right there, it's in your face. So you've got to look at that, see where people are falling, and then try to determine how you're going to set that good faith estimate for salary ranges. So if you're going to use a benchmarking company that you pay good money for, or you use Indeed or this service that was recommended here during the presentation, figure out what that's going to be, because you probably want to spend some time looking at that, right? Because if you're going to have, and we all fall into this, where you've got probably pre-COVID hires whose pay was pretty, was what you thought was good. And now after COVID and lots of quiet quitting or real quitting and lots of turnover, pay rates and inflation have pushed those numbers higher. So you're going to probably have people sitting in these jobs that are lower, making less than what you're going to be paying somebody new coming in. And you've got to figure out how you're going to deal with that. Most companies aren't going to be able to bump every historic person's pay up in order to get it, even with what we're currently dealing with for salaries that we're having to offer. Maybe you offer, instead of a pay raise, which you've got to pay that then for time immemorial until that person leaves your company, maybe you do some kind of bonus, some kind of profit sharing, it's not a sign-on bonus because they've been employed, but like a retention bonus of some sort, like a thank you so much for being here through thick and thin over COVID with us, and we want to reward that for you, and here's $5,000 or something like that. So, think about how publishing those is going to look. And then make sure that you are looking over your policies and practices. This is where you need to train HR, your recruiting teams, your management on compliance with this law, because not only do you need to make sure they're not asking about salaries, but you need to make sure that on every posting that's going out, the pay ranges are there. And so doing that training is a really good idea. And then updating, of course, your job posting templates so that you can, when you're ready to hire, you have it ready to go. You know what the salary range is going to be, or the fixed pay rate. You have your benefit descriptions there. And if you want, of course, our team has been working with clients to prepare for this, and we've been editing job descriptions as well. But there's a lot to be done before this date. Now,
Hey, Janelle.
oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'll jump in real quick with this question. Is it best practice to publish the full salary range for a position, or could an organization post a minimum to mid if that is the practice or philosophy for new hires?
No, it has to be the minimum and maximum. It can't be minimum and mid. It has to be max. And that's where, you have to think carefully about what you're going to post there. And it has to have that good faith estimate. So if you just really underestimate it, and so that aren't drawing in a bunch of people that you're like, oh God, I can't really afford that, but that is kind of our maximum. You're going to run afoul of these posting pay disclosure requirements. So I would not recommend that. And that's where spending some time to make that good faith estimate now, so that you know what you're comfortable with and what your company's good with for bottom line, is important. These things are going to take time to figure out.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've been recommending is, maybe also in conjunction with this, is conducting a pay audit. So if you've never done a pay audit within your company before, they're not the most fun thing you've ever gone through. Does the word audit ever give anybody any sort of like warm fuzzies? No, you hear audit and you think, ugh, sounds like a dental procedure. But it is super critical to do these somewhat frequently. I would say every couple of years is great, to make sure that people that you already have working within your company are within these new ranges that you're planning to post. Because if you don't address those issues now, those are going to come to light after January 1st, when you start publishing pay bands, and people are like, wait a minute, I don't earn that much money. What's going on? And you'll hear one of my favorite sayings, and my team hears it all the time, and you do too, is perception is reality. So if somebody looks at your new job posting, and they see that they earn less than what you say the minimum pay is, they're going to think, you know what? I get paid this because I'm a woman. I get paid this because I'm a fill in the blank protected class. It might be because they're terrible at their job, or they have no experience and you went on a limb to hire your cousin's kid or something like that. I don't know. But that disgruntled person is who causes problems for your company. So make sure you know where people are falling. And if you've got people outside, be prepared to document why. Same if they blow past that maximum. For example, you again might have most of your employees are within this range, but you've got somebody who's just phenomenal. You can't lose them. They're integral to your operation. They're going to fall outside. Document why. That's okay, potentially, depending on the circumstances, assuming it's not because they're, a white man. But it can be okay for them to be outside these ranges. Just be prepared to justify why. Something else you might want to look at is updating your job descriptions. So it's job posting laws, but you might want to put in your job descriptions or your other recruiting materials, the salary ranges, and prepare for some questions. Like I said, it might not jump to lawsuit, but people might have some justifiable grousing to do about what their pay is. And so, just be prepared for that. Monitor some further guidance. The effective date's a little way out still, so it is possible we could get some additional guidance from the Department of Labor on this. But for now, this is kind of what we've got to go with. Like I said, we have been helping clients with this. So if you want to either, start looking into having a pay audit done, or you want us to look at pay, your mins and maxes, we are not a benchmarking company. We do lots of things wonderfully, but we don't benchmark. So we don't have the data needed to provide you with that kind of salary. What should somebody like this be making? But we can help you help make those decisions, help update job descriptions, that sort of thing. So, Sophie, and I've got Chris's information here. So if you're not already a client of ours, you can reach out to Chris and he'll be happy to send you our way. Any other questions people have, go ahead, and we've got a few minutes, which almost never happens. So feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll get those addressed as well.
Great, thanks, Janelle. So we do have a couple other questions. So the first is, if a posting is a contract role, is it required to post the pay band? Does this change if the role is contract to direct hire?
No, it's still the same requirement. So if you're hiring for a position, you've got to post a pay band.
Okay, thank you. And then, are there any exceptions, especially for highly compensated senior level positions?
No, not that I'm aware of. No, we might, and this might be a place where we get some, clarification on that, but no, not to my knowledge. There are not exceptions for highly compensated folks, which, now hopefully you can justify that, because somebody who is a company's CFO is going to make more money than somebody who is that company's receptionist, right? So it makes sense that that person's pay is going to be probably in most instances much higher. But yeah, I don't see any exceptions in the statute offhand for that.
Okay, great. And then I'll just say again that shared resource in case anyone missed it the
Perfect.
first time. We did get another little plug for its capabilities too. So again, that was ONET. So www.onet and then online, online.org. And I've now learned that it is a great for building job descriptions, as it shares info on tasks, duties, competencies, education, etc. So that's a really good tip.
Wonderful. And we are not advocating for this service, and we can't speak to, that it is going to provide you, good information, but just sharing amongst everybody. Awesome.
Exactly. So, but yeah, that's it for right now. So,
Okay.
wait, actually, one more came in. So, if
Okay.
the application asks for desired salary, is that okay because it's not a conversational prompt?
I think that that's a gray area. I think that taking out that question is the safer move to make, because you're not then, because somebody's probably, they don't know. And because what they really want companies doing is posting what their pay is setting it ahead of time, so there's no monkey business with setting salaries. So I think it's a gray area. I think technically you could ask for salary expectations in a written document, but I would caution that we don't have guidance. We don't know how the Department of Labor is going to analyze that issue. And I think if you do something like that, you have to be prepared to defend that action, potentially in court. So I would say it's a little gray and possibly a little dicey.
Okay, thank you. And that is all for questions right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. If you have follow-up questions, you want to discuss, the situation with your company a little bit more in depth, please definitely reach out. But otherwise, thanks for attending.
Thank you, everyone.